Welcome to Salon Talks. My name is Gabriella Faragine and I'm a staff writer here at Salon. My guest today is John Green. You know him as the best-selling author of The Fault in Our Stars, Looking for Alaska, Paper Towns, and more. He's here today to talk about the film adaptation of his novel, Turtles All the Way Down, which is now streaming on Max. Welcome, John.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so we're really excited to have you here today. Turtles, which came out in 2017, tells the story of Asa Holmes, a 16-year-old living in Indianapolis who, along with her best friend Daisy, pursues the mystery of a missing fugitive billionaire, Russell Pickett. Doing so allows her to reconnect with Davis, Russell's son, an old friend of hers who becomes something more. The book also chronicles Asa's struggles with intense anxiety and how that affects her sense of self and her relationships with others. You were an executive producer on the film. You even had a cameo as the gym teacher, Mr. Adler.
Yeah.
How much of a role did you have in crafting the script and, especially translating the story into a visual medium?
Well, first off, thank you for summarizing the plot better than I ever could. Whenever people are like, why does Turtles All the Way Down about? I'm always like, oh gosh, I don't know. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to be on set. I was on set almost every day. We filmed in Cincinnati, which is not too far from my hometown of Indianapolis. Which is why the book is set there. I love writing about Indianapolis. I love Indianapolis so much. We have our problems, but I still love it. And but yeah, I got to really feel like I was a part of the movie from the beginning. And Hannah Marks, the director, is such a welcoming, collaborative person, and the producers were the same folks I've worked with for over 10 years. So it was just a blast. It was really the joy of a lifetime.
That's great. The film explores Asa's struggles with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Her anxiety is not explicitly labeled in the book.
Yeah.
You yourself have talked about coping with OCD throughout your life. Given your own history with that specific form of anxiety, what did you want to convey in the movie's portrayal of it?
Well, I think it's really hard. I mean, in the past, Hollywood has done a terrible job of portraying obsessive-compulsive disorder in particular, but mental health disorders in general. A lot of times OCD is treated as it's played for laughs. Other times it's romanticized as something that gives you superpowers, makes you a really good detective. And that's why I wanted this to be a detective story, but one where the plot keeps getting sidelined by this person's actual inability to be a detective because they're so consumed by their own obsessive thoughts.
I'm just realizing Holmes is a nod to Sherlock Holmes, of course.
Yeah, a little nod to Sherlock Holmes there. But she can't be a good detective precisely because she's so sick. And that's my own experience with OCD. When I'm really sick, I can't notice the end of my nose, let alone conclude what you do for a job by giving you the once-over.
Sure.
And so I wanted to try to find some kind of form or language for the experience of obsessive fear and how disabling it can be. The worry with the movie for me was always that it's so hard to translate a really interior experience into a film. Well, films are so much about the literal exterior of people. And so I was really worried about that. But once I met Hannah Marks, our director, when she came in to pitch the movie, she actually had a 2-minute video that she'd made that depicted what she thought these intrusive thoughts could look and sound like. And it looked and sounded and felt so much like my own experience of OCD that from that moment on, I just wanted her to direct the movie, and I felt like we would be fine as long as she did.
Yeah, and I think that you really do see that come across with those visuals of the microbes and even that staticky sound that Asa hears before she's about to have one of those intrusive thoughts. It was very visceral.
Yeah, it's quite visceral. There were definitely days when I was on set where I could only just bear it. Where there were some really hard days where I wanted to even intervene and say we need to stop, but Isabella always assured me that she was okay and this is her job and something that she enjoys doing, but she's so good at it that I had a hard time at least.
Well, that's a great segue into my next question, which was going to be, the actors who were cast for these roles, specifically the roles of Asa, Daisy, and Davis. Were they loosely what you were imagining, or did any of their performances surprise you especially?
Well, I don't have any I don't have much of a visual imagination, so I don't see faces or anything.
Oh, that's interesting.
But when I went back and reread part of Turtles All the Way Down recently for an audio thing, I found myself picturing Davis as Felix and Asa as Bella and Daisy as Cree. And that was such an interesting experience for me because they'd become those characters so deeply for me that I was now seeing them, even though before that I kind of saw no one.
Right.
But yeah, all three of them, when they first auditioned, I felt like, gosh, these have to be the people. Bella especially seemed to understand the inside of obsessive thoughts so well and so viscerally.
I thought the movie did such a great job of showing just how layered and complex anxiety is, especially how it can impact our relationships with those close to us, not just ourselves. We see how Asa's relationship with Davis is strained by her connection, by her anxiety, but also her relationship with Daisy. There's that really, really profound scene when they're in the car right before that car crash happens, where Daisy tells Asa that she's pathologically uncurious about other people's lives because basically so much of her lived experience is internal. How important was it to you to really show both sides of the coin of an anxiety disorder, so to speak?
It's really hard because, this is something that affects caregivers as well and affects your loved ones. I was talking to an expert in OCD recently who said OCD is a family disease. And it really can, and in my life, it's certainly affected not just me, but also people who are close to me. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that that's something I'm doing. That's something that's happening as a result of me being sick. And I don't want to be sick, and they don't want me to be sick. And we're all just trying to figure out the best way forward together. And that can be really hard. That's hard with any chronic illness, I think. And so I wanted to try to acknowledge that. But especially when you're 16 and you're trying to be a good best friend, like that's pretty hard in the best of circumstances. Like 16-year-old best friendships are super fraught and complicated, and I wanted to try to capture the truth of that.
We see Asa speak with Professor Abbott, played by Jake Smith Cameron, when she visits Northwestern with Davis. She tells her that she doesn't feel real, that her thoughts and behaviors are not her own, effectively, which prompts Professor Abbott to share the story behind the expression "turtles all the way down." This scene seems to illuminate what I feel like is the crux of, Asa's fear, which isn't necessarily the possibility of contracting C. diff, which we see her panic about at multiple points, especially during that really heartrending scene in the hospital, but perhaps of not being in control of her mind and body, of being this fictional character, of having the story of her life and who she is told by someone else. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, you're my dream reader. That's exactly right. And of course, she is fictional. In real life, she is a fictional character in a novel. And I wanted to play with that a little, but mostly I think that this is something I've struggled with. Half the cells in my body aren't mine. And those cells do some of my thinking for me. The bacteria in my body they can affect whether I feel happy, whether I feel sad. They can affect what I'm hungry for. They can affect when I feel certain things. That's real. That's not an obsessive thought or fear. That's a real thing. And we kind of whisper ourselves into being as like an individual, but everything about us is so contingent, not just upon the bacteria that live inside of us, but upon everything, upon our friendships and our relationships and where we live and how we grow up. And, so we are a product of circumstance to such a degree that can you really say that there's a you independent of that circumstance? That's a question that Asa really struggles with. And certainly when I was writing the book, I was coming out of a period where I intensely struggled with that question, and I felt like I felt fictional. I felt like my if you can't choose your thoughts, if you can't choose what's happening to you, to what extent are you real? That's something. I would always ask my people in my life to try to get. I was always looking for comfort. When you have OCD, you're always looking to kind of close the loop on the thought and find a way that you can just shut down the worry. And I would always ask people, including strangers, how do you convince yourself that you're real?
Yeah.
And I don't have a great answer for that even now.
Yeah, neither did my philosophy lectures in college.
The more philosophy you read, the worse it gets, unfortunately.
Exactly. What is it that draws you to want to write about young people in your book so often?
Well, I've liked writing about young people for a lot of reasons. I think one of the things from a creative perspective is that they're doing so much for the first time, and they're approaching questions not just around like romantic love, but that's exciting to have happen for the first time, but also like the big philosophical questions around grief and suffering and what we owe each other and what we owe ourselves. They're asking those questions without any irony, which I love. They're so earnest in that exploration. They're so honest about it. They understand that this has real life consequences. And you get older and you start to, you start to think of that stuff as almost like to the side of the real world. And the real world is like paying your mortgage and paying off your car. And, and that's true. It's all that is super important. But I like the purity with which they approach those questions. And then as readers, they're just the best. Like they're so generous, they're so open-minded, and like the books that I read when I was 16 mean so much to me even now. And if I can have that be the case for some young readers today, that's just amazing.
Even if you don't know what it's like to have OCD, Turtles All the Way Down has entry points for everyone. Anxiety, love, grief, these are all very real things that people grapple with. What would you have to say to adolescents who might be struggling with some of the same issues Aza is, OCD or otherwise?
Well, the brain, especially when it's unwell, it tells an incredibly compelling and simple and straightforward story, which is that despair is the correct response to consciousness, that we should be merely hopeless, that that nothing matters, that everything is stupid and meaningless and painful. And that's such a compelling story when you're not well. It just happens to be untrue. All simple stories about the human experience are untrue. The truth is much more complex than mere despair. And I guess what I would say to young people who are going through a hard time is first, like, there is help available. There is hope. Like, even when your brain tells you that there is no hope, there is hope. I'm living evidence of that. Like, I have a serious mental illness. I've had it most of my life. It's often been debilitating, and yet also I have a wonderful life. And that's something we really wanted to capture in Turtles All the Way Down. It's a funny movie, it's a big-hearted movie, and that's because like life is funny, life is big-hearted, life is warm, even when it's hard. Those things don't negate each other. We have to find a way to live in a world where all of this stuff is true at the same time.
Absolutely. Clearly, you identify with some of the same issues that Aza has. Did you write her with yourself in mind? Which of her traits do you feel you most identify with?
Well, I have a different form of OCD than her, but I still have pretty severe OCD. That's one thing. She lives in Indianapolis. I live in Indianapolis. She loves an Applebee's. I'm open-minded to an Applebee's. But I think the biggest thing is that I wanted to find some way of talking back to the person I was then. I don't know what it's like to be 16. I don't know what it's like to be a girl. I didn't even know what it was like to be 16 when I was 16. Like I felt like I was like an anthropologist studying 16 rather than someone experiencing it. But I wanted to write a letter back to that kid who was, in the hopes that maybe the kids who are today going through similar stuff might find some solace or some consolation in it, because it was a really hard time of my life. People talk all the time. Maybe the reason I've been successful as a writer is because I don't really romanticize adolescence. Like, it sucked. I hated it. People who say it's the best years of your life, like, I don't know what went wrong with their lives. But for me, it was simply not the best years of my life. It was a time of real instability and difficulty and profound loss and grief and all that stuff. So I wanted to capture that and kind of send a little time capsule back to 16-year-old me and say, this is, you don't know the whole story yet.
That's a really profound sentiment. The role of the novelist in this day and age is an interesting and often challenging one. You faced long-standing backlash for your debut novel, Looking for Alaska, specifically in your home states of Florida and Indiana. It's frequently been listed on the American Library Association's banned novels list. What does it mean to you to be a storyteller today, especially in an era of censorship and radicalism surrounding literature?
Well, it's really weird. I mean, it's quite unpleasant to be called a pornographer. I don't think I am, or to be called the other terrible things that people say. But I also think it's important to note that, novelists are not the main character of that story. The main characters are the librarians and teachers who are prevented from doing their jobs by these radical school boards, and that's the hardest. Those are the people who are really at the front lines of this. And then secondarily, the readers who are being denied opportunities to read books. Like, I don't want other parents deciding what my kids read. And I don't want other kids' parents deciding what's available in public libraries. And so I think that the vast majority of people are on the same page about this, but the people who would restrict access to information, restrict intellectual freedom in the United States are very well organized. And it does seem like they're a growing force in American political life, and that scares the crap out of me.
Having your novels adapted, is that a creative process that you ever imagined as someone who studied writing? You were huge on Tumblr and you've had a YouTube channel forever. So I imagine you do feel expressive in multiple mediums.
Yeah. But when I'm writing books, I never think that they're going to be movies. This book in particular, I kind of partly wrote it because it couldn't be made into a movie, like it was impossible to imagine this book that takes place entirely inside of someone's head being a film. But yeah, so I don't really think about movies in the context of writing. I don't understand the movie business very well. I can't write a screenplay or anything like that. I'm just along for the ride, and it's been a fun ride.
As a writer, I'm really always fascinated by other writers' creative processes. Where and when do you feel like you are the most creative?
It varies a lot. I mean, it varies by book too. So when I was writing The Fault in Our Stars, I wanted to be in a place with people. So I was at the Starbucks at 86th and Ditch Street in Indianapolis. I know we could name Ditch anything, but we call it Ditch. We could name that Madam C.J. Walker Way, but we call it Ditch. So I wrote that book at a Starbucks, and it felt good to be around people. It felt good to be seated. Turtles All the Way Down was so interior that I wrote most of it in bed, or in my chair, alone in my room or in the basement, just trying to really minimize the amount of stimulus that I was experiencing so that I could focus internally and focus on the way down deep stuff that's hard to find language for.
Earlier you said watching some of those scenes were slightly triggering for you. Was writing some of that also difficult for you from time to time?
Yeah, it was a hard book to write, but also I want to be cautious not to complain too much about writing, which is a pretty good job in the scheme of things. Whenever I complain to my dad about writing, he always says, "Well, it ain't roofing."
Culturally, we are in the midst of a teen mental health crisis. Studies trace this to smartphones and social media, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic. How much, if at all, was this crisis a consideration in the production of Turtles?
It was something we talked and thought about a lot, because this is a very strange moment in history where mental health in young people is clearly getting worse. I don't think we know all the reasons why, although I think that you've nailed a couple of them. But it really worries me. When I was a kid, I was one of the only kids in my school who took psychotropic medication, who was in therapy. And now there were probably other kids who needed to be in therapy and needed to have access to medication. But I just worry that we don't have nearly the infrastructure right now to support the amount of mental health care need. And so we're in this situation where it's really difficult to access care, and especially for young people. And that is really frustrating for me. And so I hope that people understand that there is hope and there is help, but right now it can be difficult to access it. And that's just not acceptable. We need a better healthcare system when it comes, obviously we need a better healthcare system overall, but we need to be taking mental health issues much more seriously. Part of that for me is also trying to destigmatize them. You know, we still have OCD is still stigmatized. Major depression is still stigmatized, but especially, you know, schizoaffective disorder or bipolar disorder are hugely stigmatized in our culture. And finding ways to talk about that stuff, and I mean, that's one of the reasons I want to be public about living with mental illness, even though it's uncomfortable for me, to be honest, is because I don't think there's anything shameful or embarrassing about this. It's just a reality for a lot of people.
Definitely. Well, John, those are all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here with us. Turtles All the Way Down is streaming now on Max.
What a joy.
Thank you for watching Salon Talks. Be sure to subscribe as we feature some of your favorite artists, authors, and more. And while you're here, you might as well watch another video by clicking right here.